What happens when the most ridiculed woman in high society holds the key to saving its most scandalous outcast, London, whispered she was too bookish to ever marry, while they declared him a ruined, treacherous duke? But a single whispered equation in a crowded ballroom changed the course of history. The year was 1847, an era when London was choking on the soot of the Industrial Revolution, yet still bound by the suffocating silk ribbons of high society. Within the grand gilded walls of Grosvenor Square, a woman's worth was calculated by the symmetry of her face and the vastness of her father's estate. Intellect, especially in the harsh, unforgiving realms of mathematics and engineering, was considered a severe deformity in a debutante. Genevieve Caldwell, the eldest daughter of the Earl of Locksley, bore this deformity like a heavy, invisible chain. At 24, she was firmly classified as a spinster. Her peers called her the Locksley Library Ghost, a cruel moniker earned because she preferred the company of architectural treatises over the vapid gossip of the drawing room. Genevieve possessed a mind of terrifying brilliance. While the other ladies of the ton debated the merits of French lace, Genevieve secretly corresponded with the finest structural engineers in Europe under the pseudonym G.C. Alden. Her family treated her intelligence as a shameful affliction. Her aunt, Lady Agatha, frequently bemoaned her niece's prospects. "If only you could empty your head of those dreadful numbers, Genevieve," Agatha had scolded just that morning, snatching a charcoal sketch of a suspension arch from Genevieve's hands. "Men do not wish to marry a ledger. They wish to marry a lady." Genevieve endured the sneers and the isolation with quiet dignity, burying her revolutionary ideas in locked, velvet-lined boxes beneath her bed. But the world outside her window was moving rapidly, demanding innovation. No one felt the brutal edge of this changing world more acutely than Tristan Danvers, the Duke of Ravenscroft. A month prior, Tristan had been the golden prince of the realm, a progressive aristocrat who had invested the entirety of his vast ducal fortune into a singular, monumental vision, the Kingsbridge Viaduct. It was meant to be an iron marvel spanning the treacherous gorge of the River Ouse, a testament to modern industry that would connect the impoverished northern mining towns to the bustling southern ports. But on a rainy Tuesday in late April, the Kingsbridge Viaduct collapsed. The disaster was catastrophic. Thousands of tons of wrought iron twisted and tore apart, plunging into the roaring waters below. Miraculously, the death toll was limited to 2 watchmen, but the financial and social ruin was absolute. Overnight, the Duke of Ravenscroft transformed from a visionary hero into a disgraced pariah. Whispers slithered through the gentlemen's clubs of Pall Mall. The Duke had cut corners, embezzled funds, and used substandard iron to line his own pockets. The Crown immediately launched an inquiry freezing the Ravenscroft accounts. Tristan was facing not only the complete loss of his ancestral lands, but the very real threat of imprisonment in Newgate for criminal negligence. The chief inspector appointed by the Crown to investigate the collapse was none other than Lord Frederick Stanton, a pompous, politically ambitious engineer who had always despised the Duke's progressive ideals. Genevieve had read of the collapse in the Times. While society gleefully dissected the Duke's scandalous fall from grace, Genevieve's mind attacked the problem differently. She knew Tristan Danvers by reputation. He was meticulous. He would not have compromised on materials. The failure had to be structural. But the original blueprints, published in the engineering journals months prior, had been flawless. She had studied them herself, marveling at the elegant distribution of load-bearing tension. Driven by an insatiable obsessive curiosity, Genevieve committed a highly unladylike act of espionage. During a dinner party hosted by her politically connected brother-in-law, Arthur Linfield, she slipped into his private study. Arthur was on the Parliamentary Oversight Committee for the Viaduct, and his desk was covered in the official inquiry documents. By the dim light of a single flickering candle, Genevieve rapidly sifted through the confidential papers until she found what she was looking for: the finalized construction schematics signed off by Lord Stanton just weeks before the collapse. It took her brilliant mind less than 4 minutes to spot the fatal discrepancy. Stanton, under the guise of improving the design and cutting costs for the Crown's supplementary funding, had altered the angle of the primary suspension chains by exactly 4 degrees, reducing the number of anchor bolts in the northern pier. It was a subtle change, invisible to the untrained eye, but catastrophic to the mathematical integrity of the structure. Under the sheer weight of a heavy rainstorm and maximum wind resistance, those 4 degrees created a shearing force the iron could not withstand. Stanton hadn't just made an error, he had sabotaged the Duke of Ravenscroft to steal his glory and ruin his legacy, and was now framing Tristan for the inevitable disaster. Genevieve's heart pounded against her ribs. She held in her trembling hands the absolute proof of the Duke's innocence. But who would believe her? She was the ridiculed Locksley spinster. If she came forward, she would be dismissed as hysterical, or worse, ruined, for interfering in the political affairs of men. Yet as she stared at the damning calculations, a fierce sense of justice ignited within her. She had been mocked her entire life for the very intellect that could now save a man from total destruction. The grand ballroom of the Abernathy estate was a suffocating sea of silk diamonds and malicious whispers. It was the height of the summer season, and Lady Caroline Abernathy's gala was the premier event of the month. Genevieve stood near the imposing marble pillars at the edge of the room, dressed in a muted lavender gown, chosen specifically by her aunt to make her blend into the wallpaper. She clutched a delicate ivory fan, her eyes scanning the glittering crowd. Then the music seemed to falter, and a palpable hush rippled through the room. Tristan Danvers, the ruined Duke of Ravenscroft, had just walked through the towering oak doors. He looked magnificent and entirely out of place. The stress of the impending trial had carved harsh, aristocratic lines into his jaw, and his dark eyes burned with a defiant cold fire. He wore stark black devoid of the usual colourful waistcoats and cravat pins favoured by the ton. He looked like a phantom haunting his own wake. The society members parted before him, like water, turning their backs, hiding their faces behind feathered fans, and whispering loudly enough for him to hear. The audacity to show his face, Lady Caroline sneered loud enough to carry over the violins. One would think a man facing Newgate would have the decency to stay in the shadows. Tristan ignored them, his jaw clenched, making his way toward the card room. But his path was intentionally blocked by a group of gentlemen, laughing raucously. At the centre of the group stood Lord Frederick Stanton, holding court. "Ah, your grace." Stanton called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "I am surprised you are not in Yorkshire, sifting through the rust of your magnificent failure." Tristan stopped, his entire body rigid. "My engineers built that viaduct to the exact specifications approved by the Crown, Stanton. Specifications you personally signed. Come now, Danvers. Stanton chuckled, swirling his brandy. We all know you ordered cheaper iron to offset your gambling debts. The mathematics of the collapse are undeniable. The tensile strain was compromised by poor materials. Any first-year student of the Royal Society could see it. Stanton turned to the crowd, eager to humiliate the Duke further. The man tried to cheat gravity, and gravity collected its due. The lords around Stanton erupted into cruel laughter. Tristan's fists curled at his sides. He was trapped. His chief engineer had conveniently fled the country, heavily bribed, leaving Tristan with no way to mathematically prove the design had been fatally altered. Genevieve watched the scene unfold from her pillar. She felt a sickening knot in her stomach. She watched the proud, ruined man standing alone against a tide of arrogant liars. She thought of her locked boxes of formulas, her entire life spent hiding in the shadows to make other people comfortable. No more, she thought. Genevieve snapped her ivory fan shut. The sharp crack echoed surprisingly loud in the tense silence between the music. She stepped out from the shadows of the pillar and walked directly into the center of the room. The crowd stared in bewilderment as the Locksley ghost inserted herself into a gentleman's dispute. You are mistaken, Lord Stanton. Genevieve's voice rang out clear, precise, and completely devoid of fear. Stanton blinked, staring down his nose at her. Miss Caldwell, are you lost? The refreshment room is down the hall. Genevieve ignored the tittering laughter from the ladies nearby. She locked her gaze on Stanton. I said you are mistaken. The tensile strain was not compromised by the quality of the iron. The Kingsbridge Viaduct failed because the primary suspension chains on the northern pier were altered from their original 22-degree angle to a mathematically fatal 18 degrees. The room went deathly quiet. Tristan Danvers turned slowly, his dark, intense eyes locking onto the unassuming woman in the lavender dress. Stanton flushed a dark, angry red. What nonsense is this? You are a woman speaking of things you cannot possibly comprehend. At 18 degrees, Genevieve cut him off, her voice rising with absolute icy authority. The load-bearing capacity of the wrought iron is reduced by 34%. When combined with a lateral wind force of 40 knots, which was recorded on the night of the collapse, the shearing stress on the anchor bolts exceeded their maximum tolerance by exactly 12,000 pounds. She took a step closer to the towering royal engineer, unflinching. It was not a failure of materials, Lord Stanton. It was a failure of your revised geometry, a revision you mandated to reduce the cost of the northern pier. The silence in the Abernathy ballroom was absolute. Even the musicians had stopped playing. Stanton's jaw worked soundlessly, his face draining of color. How? Where did you hear such absurd numbers? He stammered, entirely thrown off balance by the terrifying accuracy of her data. I did not hear them, Genevieve replied smoothly. I calculated them, and if a spinster can find the flaw in your design in 4 minutes, Lord Stanton, I shudder to think what the parliamentary inquiry will do when they are handed the comparative blueprints tomorrow morning. Genevieve did not wait for his response. She turned her back on the stunned, open-mouthed crowd and walked swiftly out of the ballroom, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had done it. She had ruined her own reputation forever by speaking out of turn. But she had exposed the truth. She retreated rapidly into the dimly lit, cavernous library of the Abernathy estate, seeking the quiet sanctuary of the books. She leaned against a mahogany table, pressing a trembling hand to her forehead. "Wait." The deep, gravelly voice came from the doorway. Genevieve gasped and spun around. Tristan Danvers was standing there. He closed the heavy oak doors behind him, shutting out the chaos of the party. He walked slowly toward her, his eyes stripping away the plain lavender dress, seeing right through to the brilliant, dangerous woman beneath. "Who are you?" Tristan demanded, softly stopping just a foot away. "Really?" "Genevieve Caldwell," she whispered suddenly, painfully. Aware of his imposing height and the fierce intensity radiating from him. "No one in London knows those numbers," Tristan said, his voice laced with awe and a sudden, desperate hope. "My own solicitors do not understand the math well enough to argue it in court. I knew the design was changed, but I couldn't prove why it failed without the schematics Stanton hid." He stared down at her. "How did you know the exact shearing stress?" Genevieve lifted her chin, dropping the mask she had worn her entire life. "Because I am G.C. Alden, and I have been reviewing your bridge designs for 3 years, Your Grace." Tristan's breath hitched. G.C. Alden, the brilliant, reclusive engineering mind he had corresponded with, the genius he had tried and failed to hire. "You," he whispered, reaching out as if to touch her, then stopping himself. A slow, brilliant smile broke across his exhausted features, transforming him from a ruined duke into a dangerous revolutionary. "They mocked you for years, and you hold the key to destroying them all." Genevieve met his gaze, the fire in her own eyes matching his. "Then let us burn their empire to the ground, Your Grace." The Abernathy library smelled of beeswax, old paper, and sudden, dangerous rebellion. Tristan Danvers stared at the woman before him as if she had just materialized from the ether. G.C. Alden. The brilliant mind that had corrected his load distribution theories for the past 3 years was not a grizzled Oxford professor, but a ridiculed debutante in a lavender dress. "If we are to burn their empire," Tristan said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur, "we require the matches. You saw the original schematics on your brother-in-law's desk, but seeing them is not enough, Genevieve. Stanton will have submitted a forged set to the Crown, a set displaying the correct 22-degree angle to make it appear as though the error happened during construction under my watch." Genevieve nodded, her mind already racing 10 steps ahead. "Arthur is a coward, but he is a meticulous bureaucrat. He keeps the parliamentary seal on all active committee documents. If we can secure the blueprint bearing Stanton's signature and the 18-degree revision, we prove premeditated sabotage. I will go to your brother-in-law's estate tonight," Tristan declared, his aristocratic features hardening into a mask of pure determination. "No," Genevieve countered, stepping forward. The proximity to the Duke sent an unfamiliar thrill through her veins, but she pushed it aside. Cold, hard logic was their only weapon now. If the ruined Duke of Ravenscroft is caught breaking into a parliamentarian's home, you will hang before the week is out. I must do it. I have the key to his study. But we must act swiftly. Stanton was terrified by what I said in the ballroom. He will go straight to Arthur to have the documents destroyed. They agreed to a desperate plan, setting a rendezvous at midnight near the iron gates of the Loxley town home. The carriage ride back to her family's estate was the longest hour of Genevieve's life. Her aunt, Lady Agatha, had been so mortified by Genevieve's public outburst that she had feigned a fainting spell, forcing their early departure. For the entire journey, Agatha berated her, threatening to banish her to a remote cottage in the Scottish Highlands. For once, Genevieve did not care. The suffocating cage of high society had shattered the moment she spoke her truth. Upon arriving, the house was plunged into the quiet of the night, but Genevieve noticed a carriage with the Stanton crest pulling away from the rear service alley. Her blood ran cold. She slipped off her silk slippers and hurried up the servants' stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached Arthur Linfield's heavy mahogany door just as a sliver of light flickered from beneath it. She pressed her ear to the wood and heard the frantic sound of paper tearing, followed by the striking of a match. He was burning the evidence. Without a second thought, Genevieve threw open the door. Arthur stood by the fireplace, his face pale and slick with sweat, holding a stack of vellum blueprints over the licking flames. "Arthur, stop!" Genevieve cried out, lunging across the Persian rug. Arthur gasped, dropping one of the sheets into the fire. "Genevieve, have you lost your mind? Get out of here. Stanton ordered you to burn them, didn't he?" she demanded, grabbing the heavy brass fire poker and desperately fishing the curling blueprint from the flames. She stomped on the smoking edge, saving the bottom half of the page. "You are abetting treason. Arthur Stanton altered the bridge design and blamed the Duke, and you are helping him cover it up." Arthur grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. "You foolish girl. Stanton is poised to become the chief engineer of the realm. If he falls, he takes the entire committee down with him. You will ruin this family. This family is already ruined if it stands on the graves of innocent men." Genevieve twisted out of his grip. In the scuffle, her eyes darted to the desk. The master ledger, the heavy leather-bound book containing the official parliamentary wax seals, and the logged correspondence between Stanton and the iron foundries, sat unguarded. While Arthur lunged to retrieve the half-burned blueprint, Genevieve snatched the ledger, shoving it beneath the heavy folds of her lavender skirt. "You are hysterical," Arthur snarled, throwing the ruined blueprint back into the fire and watching it turn to ash. He turned to her, his chest heaving. "It is done. The proof is gone. Tomorrow the Duke of Ravenscroft will be indicted, and you, Genevieve, will be locked in your room until I can arrange passage to a convent in France. You are a disgrace to the Locksley name." Genevieve offered a small, icy smile. "Good night, Arthur." She walked calmly out of the study, locking the door from the outside with the key she had stolen from his coat pocket earlier. Let him rage. She had the ledger. It wasn't the blueprint, but it was the next best thing, the paper trail of the bribes. She fled down the grand staircase, out through the servants' entrance, and into the damp, foggy London night. By the iron gates, a black carriage waited devoid of a crest. The door swung open, and a strong gloved hand reached out. Tristan pulled her inside. She collapsed onto the velvet seat, gasping for breath, and dropped the heavy ledger onto the floorboards between them. "He burned the schematics," Genevieve panted, "but I secured the committee ledger. It logs the reduced iron shipments. Mathematically, the missing tonnage directly correlates to the missing anchor bolts in Stanton's 18-degree design." Tristan stared at the ledger, then up at her flushed, triumphant face. He reached out his thumb, gently wiping a smear of black soot from her cheek. "You are an absolute terror, Miss Caldwell." He whispered, his voice thick with an emotion that made Genevieve's breath catch. and the most magnificent creature I have ever beheld. But the battle was not yet won. A ledger of shipments was circumstantial. To a room full of arrogant lords, it would not be enough to overthrow the testimony of a royal engineer. They needed an unimpeachable authority to validate Genevieve's mathematics. "We need someone Stanton cannot bully," Genevieve said, recovering her composure. "Someone whose engineering brilliance outshines the entire crown." Tristan smiled a dangerous wolfish grin. "I know exactly who to wake up." An hour later, the carriage rattled to a halt outside a brick townhouse in Westminster. Tristan pounded on the door until a grumbling servant opened it. They were ushered into a chaotic study, overflowing with models of steamships and railway lines. Standing amidst the chaos, smoking a thick cigar and wearing a dressing gown, was Isambard Kingdom Brunel, the greatest civil engineer of the 19th century. Brunel squinted at Tristan, then at the young woman beside him. "Ravenscroft, you are supposed to be hiding under a rock. And who is this Mr. Brunel?" Genevieve stepped forward, clutching her notebook of calculations. "I am G.C. Alden." Brunel nearly dropped his cigar. He snatched the notebook from her hands, pushing his spectacles up his nose. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the scratching of Brunel's pencil as he verified Genevieve's equations against the shipment ledger. Finally, Brunel slammed the book shut. He looked at Genevieve with profound reverence. "The math is flawless. Stanton engineered a death trap to save £40,000 and let the wind pull the trigger." He turned to Tristan. "When does the inquiry convene?" 9 o'clock this morning, Tristan replied. Brunel grinned around his cigar. "Then I suggest we prepare to give Lord Stanton a very thorough education in structural dynamics." The great hall of the Palace of Westminster was packed to the rafters. Members of Parliament, lords, and journalists clustered together, eager to witness the final destruction of the Duke of Ravenscroft. The air was thick with tension and the smell of damp wool. Lord Frederick Stanton stood at the podium, looking every inch the victorious statesman. He had just finished a stirring 2-hour testimony detailing the Duke's supposed negligence, his reckless spending, and the tragic but unavoidable consequence of a peer trying to play the role of a tradesman. "In conclusion, my lords," Stanton projected his voice to the gallery, "the Kingsbridge Viaduct fell because the Duke of Ravenscroft valued his pride over the safety of the realm. I ask that he be stripped of his titles and remanded to Newgate Prison." A murmur of agreement swept through the hall. Tristan sat at the defendant's table, his back straight, his expression unreadable. The magistrate, an elderly earl, struck his gavel. "Does the Duke of Ravenscroft have anything to present in his defence before judgment is passed?" Tristan stood slowly. "I do, my lord. I wish to call upon an expert witness to review the Crown's engineering report." Stanton scoffed loudly. "Your chief engineer fled to France Danvers. You have no one left to lie for you." "I am not calling my engineer," Tristan said, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "I call Isambard Kingdom Brunel." The doors at the back of the hall swung open with a dramatic crash. The crowd gasped as the legendary Brunel strode down the center aisle. But what caused a true uproar was the person walking beside him. Genevieve Caldwell, wearing a striking tailored gown of deep emerald green, a stark contrast to the invisible lavender of the night before, walked with her head held high. She carried the heavy parliamentary ledger in her hands. Arthur Linfield, seated in the committee box, turned the color of chalk. Lady Agatha, who had secured a seat in the gallery to watch the scandal unfold, actually fainted this time. "What is the meaning of this?" Stanton demanded, his face flushing crimson. "Mr. Brunel is a respected man, but who is this woman? This is an official parliamentary inquiry, not a drawing-room tea." Brunel stepped up to the secondary podium, gently guiding Genevieve to stand beside him. "This woman, Lord Stanton, is the author of the mathematical proof that is about to send you to the gallows." The hall erupted into shouting. The magistrate hammered his gavel frantically. "Order, order, Mr. Brunel, explain yourself. I have reviewed the tensile strain calculations for the Kingsbridge Viaduct," Brunel stated loudly, silencing the room. "And I have compared them to the master shipment ledger retrieved from Mr. Arthur Linfield's private study." Arthur tried to shrink into his seat as every eye in the room turned toward him. "The ledger," Brunel continued, "proves that the iron tonnage delivered to the Northern Pier was 30% less than required by the 22-degree schematics Stanton submitted to this court." "A clerical error," Stanton shouted, sweat beading on his forehead. "The Duke ordered the reduction." "No." Genevieve's voice rang out. It was a clear, steady soprano that cut through the baritone grumbling of the men. She stepped forward, placing her notebook and the ledger on the podium. "The Duke did not order it. You did, Lord Stanton, because 30% is the exact mathematical reduction in anchor bolts required if you alter the suspension chain angle from 22 degrees to 18 degrees. "Silence her," Stanton roared. "She is a hysterical spinster. She knows nothing of engineering. I know that 18 degrees creates a shearing force of 12,000 pounds under 40 knots of wind." Genevieve fired back, staring him down without blinking. "I know that you deliberately altered the design to siphon 40,000 pounds of Crown funding into your own pockets, relying on the fact that no one in your department possessed the mathematical acumen to check your geometry. You thought you were the smartest man in the room, Lord Stanton, but you forgot to account for me." She opened the ledger to the final page, holding it up for the magistrate to see. "Here is the signature of Lord Frederick Stanton, authorizing the reduced shipment of iron, dated 2 weeks before the Duke was ever informed of a design review." The magistrate leaned forward, peering at the document. He signaled to the bailiffs, "Secure Lord Stanton and seize the records of Mr. Linfield." Chaos exploded in Westminster. Stanton screamed obscenities as the guards dragged him away. His reputation and his life completely destroyed in a matter of minutes by the very woman society had deemed worthless. Tristan walked across the floor of the Great Hall, ignoring the frantic shouting of the parliamentarians and the blinding flashes of the press cameras that were just coming into use. He stopped in front of Genevieve. The legendary Isambard Kingdom Brunel chuckled, stepping aside to give them space. "You saved my life," Tristan said softly. The harshness in his face completely melted away, leaving only profound adoration. Genevieve looked up at him, her heart soaring. "You gave me a voice, Your Grace. It seems we are an evenly matched equation." Tristan reached out, taking her ungloved hand in his right in front of the horrified, gaping mouths of London's elite. "Genevieve Caldwell," he said, his voice loud enough for the reporters to hear. "They called me a ruined duke, and they called you a ghost. What do you say we build a new world together and leave them in the dust?" Genevieve smiled, a radiant, triumphant expression that no one in high society had ever seen from her before. "I have already drawn up the blueprints, Tristan. Right there in the center of the greatest political scandal of the decade, the Duke of Ravenscroft pulled the spinster of Locksley into his arms and kissed her. It was a kiss that shattered every rule of propriety, a declaration of absolute partnership, and the undeniable foundation of an empire built on brilliance, trust, and unyielding love. And that is how a woman discarded by society and a man ruined by scandal built an empire from the ashes of betrayal, armed with nothing but mathematics and an unbreakable will. What did you think of Genevieve and Tristan's brilliant defiance against a corrupt world? If you love this story of intellect and passion, make sure to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more thrilling historical dramas.